Welcome back to the channel. Why am I an anarchist? Well, there's plenty of reasons why, but I think if I were to whittle it down to the number one reason for why my worldview revolves around basically a world without the idea of authority, the idea of government, organized, basically, again, this is the anarchist speaking, so organized criminal gangs that have managed to dupe everybody into considering them as legitimate organizations. Why do I think that the world would be better in the absence of such organizations? Well, I just kind of gave it away. I think that they're fundamentally illegitimate from the very get-go. But one specific quote comes to mind from J.R.R. Tolkien, actually, and I'm going to probably butcher it because I don't have it in front of me. But it essentially goes something like, I see myself more and more aligned with the idea of being an anarchist because the most improper job of any man is to boss another man around, and not one in a million is fit for it, the least of which those who seek the opportunity. I think I got that mostly correct. They didn't butcher it too bad. But it's really just it. I think that fundamentally, you never want anybody to rule over you who really is just chomping at the bit to do it. You never want that person who's just so eager to get at the reins of power, to get that ring of power, to be in that position over you, to lord over you. For obvious reasons. You don't want somebody like that to just micromanage the hell out of your life and, rule over you and tell you to do X, Y, or Z, because, history is replete with examples of those types of people getting power, and the end results are always pretty much the same, just tyranny and despotism left and right. And, millions and millions of people dying and getting murdered. So not only does the anarchist completely reject the idea of anybody having that sort of power, anybody having that kind of power to coercively force another person or group of people to engage in things that they want to engage in. Not only does the anarchist see that as illegitimate, but they see it as illegitimate for any person, not just the most evil people in existence, to have that power. Because what the anarchists realize, what the actual anarchist realizes, again, a lot of people out there that call themselves anarchists who have a whole bunch of stupid ideas, who have worldviews that are not conducive to actual human flourishing and prosperity, but we'll leave that aside. Actual anarchists realize that government, the ability to coercively force people to go along with the things that you find preferable, is just like it's just like the Lord of the Rings sort of idea, where the ring of power, there's the ring of power, and that it's always used for evil, but only if only I was in charge of of the ring of power. If only I had the ring of power, I would then use that power for good. And I would lord over people in a just and moral way, and things would be so much better if it won't be better. People who are anarchists like myself, they come to the correct conclusions in that they realize that by and large, ultimately, you can't reasonably expect yourself to be a good steward for other people and making decisions on behalf of those people and having that power to coerce them in case they don't comply with your dictates and your worldview. That power, if you obtain that power, is always going to corrupt you. No matter how good of a mortal being you are, no matter how moral you are, you will be corrupted by that power. Now, that could happen to various extents. It's not like all of the rulers throughout history have been just absolute, complete tyrannical despots. There's varying degrees to the totalitarianism that's been manifested upon the world. But ultimately, if we were to say that there's been people who have obtained political power who've never ever engaged in moral transgressions against others to one extent or another, we're absolutely lying to ourselves. We're completely fabricating that from whole cloth, as they say, right? It's not a thing. There has never been a government in existence that hasn't, to one extent or another, engaged in coercive violence. There have been plenty of organizations that aren't governments who've never engaged in coercive violence and despotism against other people. But when we talk about government, specifically governments, regardless of their flavor, they always commit transgressions against their subjects, because they, in essence, in order to maintain their power, in order to even exist in the first place, they have to. You can't have a government that doesn't engage in violence against its subjects. So to be an anarchist is to be somebody who wholly and entirely rejects the idea of authority, wholly and entirely rejects the idea of coercive monopolies on coercive violence in their entirety, because they realize that there is no reining it in, no constitution, no charter, no limitation or levy imposed on the power of government is ever going to be effective in the long run. It's effective and could be effective in the short run. You could petition governments, and you could amend constitutions, and you could implement constitution, etc., so forth. You could do things like the Magna Carta, right? Ostensibly reducing the power of governments and monarchies and whatnot. That can work for a while, but there's another quote by Robert Higgs that comes to mind. I mentioned Robert Higgs in one of my previous videos. that essentially really explains it in a very erudite way, where he basically says that the state is an absolute moral danger, and that people can engage in those things that I've mentioned thus far, of the constitutions and the limitations and all of that, only for a little bit of time before the fiery and destructive force of the state basically frees itself from those improvised limitations and spreads its flames far and wide, something like that. I'll include that quote as well in this video. But again, that's just it. It's just another very, very poignant quote that just describes the situation extremely well. There's no viable limit that one can impose on government, regardless of the flavor, because all governments have a absolute tendency to spread and become more and more powerful and to grow, just like cancer, just like cancer, and that is just their nature. And so humanity has to come to that conclusion, and humanity also has to come to the conclusion that there are alternatives, because a lot of people are afraid that there aren't alternatives. There are absolutely alternatives to the world that we live in today. It does not have to be tyranny and despotism and just complete absolute evil as far as the eye can see everywhere, due primarily to the belief in authority. Does not have to be this way at all. And I think a voluntary world where people are not allowed to engage in coercive violence against each other, no matter if they have a badge or authority, I think a world like that would be far better. It would be a far better place to live in than what we have today. And that is why I'm an anarchist. And it's why I think everybody should be an anarchist. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.